so good to be with you. I will wear flip-flops all weekend, just in defiance of Portland winter. And we want to welcome you. We've been looking at different facets of the identity of Jesus of Nazareth. And so if you have a Bible, let's go to Mark chapter 5. And I kind of have a conviction that I think many of us would all share, that the Bible is one of those, one of the reasons why we can trust it and we know that it's inspired and authoritative is because anybody can open it and anybody can benefit from reading it. I mean, you don't have to know Hebrew, you don't have to know Greek, you can pick up the basic plot and the announcement of God's love fulfilled in Jesus. I mean, you can get all of that. And at the same time, you can dedicate your whole life to the study of the scriptures and you'll never reach the bottom of what it has to say. They're just layers and layers and layers. I mean, we would agree that God is really, really smart. And so you could read something, or maybe not. I mean, maybe I'm the only one that would think that he's very intelligent. Still didn't work. Okay. That's awesome. And so there's this sense when you open up the scriptures that there are layers to stories that maybe we've heard before. If you're new to the Bible, we're going to look at a story this morning that is one of the reasons why you may think the Bible is just kind of a crazy book. And if you've been in churches or a follower of Jesus, this is a story you've heard before. But I want to look at it for a couple of different reasons. Number one, because there's some things about the identity of Jesus that just come shooting across so specifically. But secondly, because this is a passage that just so greatly illustrates the truth that we always have to approach the scriptures with humble hearts, even if they're stories we've heard before, because there are things present in them that you can hear 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times and just begin to appreciate. So Mark chapter 5, we'll start in verse 1. Jesus ministers in and around the Sea of Galilee, and he crosses that sea. It's called a lake sometimes. So they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran, fell on his knees in front of Jesus, and shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." So you've got a man who is possessed by demons, and the demons are speaking to Jesus, and Jesus is addressing the demons. Jesus asked the demons, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. Now, if the story isn't weird enough at this point, verse 11 makes it even stranger. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs and allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what was happening. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who'd been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who'd seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and about the pigs as well. Then the people, and this is the oddest thing, the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. Now, could we all agree that the folks of the nearby towns knew exactly who this demon-possessed dude was? Obviously, they tried to chain him. Obviously, they'd exiled him away from their communities. Obviously, he was howling throughout the night, cutting himself with stones. Pretty notorious guy. You would think that when they come across this guy in his right mind, sitting there peaceably, realized Jesus was responsible, they'd say, "This is amazing. This is miraculous. Come, we have all sorts of other people that need taken care of." But they don't do that. Instead, they're afraid and they ask him to leave. He's just ridded that area of a menace, and they're terrified of him. And I want to ask the question, why did they want Jesus to leave? Now, we're gonna need to take about 10 minutes through some historical background that could be painful. It involves a laser pointer and PowerPoint. Forgive me for both of those things. But there are some geography. The geography in this story is key. So if we could fire up the PowerPoint, and somebody last night gave me a laser pointer that has a big warning sticker on it because it is so bright. That's not it, that's my pen. Fire up the maps if you would. Jesus, there's this area over here of the Sea of Galilee that is called by scholars the Gospel Triangle. It's a series of cities, and it's a region that's very, very Jewish. And Jesus does most of his ministry over here. He calls his disciples, he does most of his miracles. This is where his popularity kind of explodes out from. That part of the Sea of Galilee. This part of the Sea of Galilee was known as the land of the 12. Now, could you flip over to the next slide? This is a kind of a larger view. There's the Sea of Galilee, right? Here's the Dead Sea. Now, notice Israel's kind of divided into two. You have the Galilee up here, named for the Sea of Galilee, and then you have Judea down here. Now, Galileans and Judeans were both Israelites, but they were kind of different folks. And so the Galileans, they were perceived to be kind of the hicks, the backward, these were illiterate folks, according to the intellectuals down in Judea. Judea, down here, you had Jerusalem. So it was the home of the temple complex and the scribes and the priesthood, and tons of money was down in the southern part of Israel. And so you have Galileans who were kind of thought to be the backward folks. You have Judeans who were the rich, elitist, sellout folks, and neither group really liked the other. In fact, one of the things that when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, the religious leaders will say is, hey, check the Bible, no prophet ever comes from Galilee. Right? It was a huge mark against him that he came from there and that his followers were Galileans. Now, the reason I tell you this is because the folks on the north side of the Sea of Galilee called that region the land of the 12. If you're Jewish, what symbolism does 12 have? 12 tribes, right? They viewed themselves as the faithful remnant of Israel within the larger community of Israel. In other words, they were the true Jews. These folks down here, they were sellouts. They were cooperating with the Romans just to make a quick buck. Those folks were folks vested in the status quo. The folks up here in the Galilee, those were the true Jews. So they called this area the land of the 12. Now, flip over, if you would, to Mark chapter 6. This is a different account. Jesus crosses back over the lake. He's in the land of the 12. He's teaching. A large crowd gathers. He has compassion on them. Verse 35. By this time it was late in the day. His disciples said to him, this is a remote place. It's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. Jesus looks at them and says, well, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take almost a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to sit people down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking 5 loaves and 2 fish, looking up to heaven. He gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up how many basketfuls? 12. 12 basketfuls in the land of the 12. You think this is coincidence? I tell you, it is not. And we will see why in just a second. Jesus did so much of his work up in that area. This was true Jewishness in the land of the 12. Now, Jesus goes across, in Mark chapter 5, he goes across to this area over here. And notice it's called the Decapolis. It's a Greek word that it referred to, there were 10 city-states, literally, that made up the Decapolis. And these were founded by Alexander the Great a couple of hundred years prior to that. And right in the middle of Israel, you have this whole section of land where non-Jewish folks lived and thrived. These folks were thoroughly Hellenistic. Remember, Alexander the Great's project was to turn the world Greek in language, in architecture, in culture, in religion. The Decapolis to the Jews was a monumental offense. They existed in the land God had given to them. They celebrated and worshiped false gods. And interestingly enough, they called this land over here the land of the seven. Up here is the land of the 12 where the true Jews are. Down here is the land of the seven. Now for the significance of that, keep your finger in Mark and go to Deuteronomy chapter 7. Deuteronomy, I'm sure many of you know, is Moses' sermon for the second generation of Israel as they stand at the cusp of the promised land. Moses is summarizing their wilderness journeys and almost recapitulating the law for them. And he says this in Deuteronomy 7. Keep your finger in Mark, Deuteronomy 7, verse 1. Lots of flipping still. So if you hit Genesis, you've gone too far left. I think I'm funny. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations. Now count them with me. The Hittites. Girgashites. Amorites. Canaanites. Perizzites. Hivites. Jebusites. 7. And then it just says 7 nations, so we could have just skipped to that part. But it was more fun to count. When he drives out these 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has given them into your hand, make sure you wipe them out completely. Now, Israel didn't do that. They only claimed part of the land in obedience to God. These folks were the descendants of those 7 nations. So they were called, this region was called the land of the 7. These were the folks that had never, ever been displaced from the promised land. So you've got the land of the 7, which didn't have a real great history, right? These were the nations that God had said, listen, you guys need to kick these folks out so you can claim the land. They didn't do that. And so the Decapolis region was called the land of the 7. Now, one of the things you have to know about this region, and 5 more minutes of background and then relevance is maybe 10 minutes away. One of the things you have to know about the Decapolis region is that it was heavily influenced by Greek religion. And one of the central gods in the Decapolis region was the god Dionysius. He was given the Roman name Bacchus. If we can go ahead and put a couple of pictures of this handsome fellow. Actually, I look a bit like that. At a time long ago. And here's a different picture of him. This is Dionysius. Now, the little cup he has right there. Dionysius has an interesting backstory. Roman mythology, Greek mythology, horribly complex. But in this region, this was the central myth about Dionysius. That Dionysius was the son of Zeus, who was the head of the gods. And he was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Samala. Samala was totally human. So Dionysius became known as the product of a god and a human. He was a god-man. He was the son of God, was one of the names given to him. Dionysius he died at birth and was resurrected by Zeus. And so he was the resurrected son of God, interestingly enough. And because of his resurrection, he became known as the god of fertility, new growth, new birth. Anything that had to do with something dormant coming back to life, Dionysius was the god of. So he was the god of fertility. He was the god of wine. He was the god of celebration. The way that you would worship Dionysius back in the days, you'd engage in some pretty inappropriate sexual behavior. It's part of the whole fertility rites. But you would also consume large amounts of wine because he was the god of wine, right? Even today, Bacchus, and I mean, there's whole etymology that has to do with him being the god of kind of parties. One of the central miracles that it was said that Dionysius would perform in that region is that you would leave a jar of water out overnight, and Dionysius was said to turn it into wine. Okay? Fascinating stuff. A son of God turning water into wine, so on, so on, so on. One of the things that you would do to worship Dionysius is that you would consume the flesh and blood of a sacred animal. There were animals in that day that represented kind of new life and fertility. And oddly enough, I'll give you one guess as to what one of those animals was. Pigs. Why is it in Mark chapter 5, Jesus crosses over to the Decapolis, the land of the seven, encounters a demon-possessed man, and right next to him are 2,000 pigs? You don't raise pigs in that part of the world in those sorts of numbers. So we think those were pigs that were being raised in the worship of Dionysius. Why is it that the people beg Jesus to leave? And notice the text emphasizes the pigs. They told him about the man and about the pigs also. And then they beg him to leave. We think the reason is, here is somebody, Son of God, no one knew about his resurrection yet, who had turned water into wine as his first miracle, who comes across the Sea of Galilee from the land of the 12 into the land of the 7, and he casts demons out of a man into a herd of pigs, and the pigs off the cliff drown in the water. Jesus, my personal opinion is that the reason they asked Jesus to leave is because they saw their religious system demolished before their eyes. That here comes this Jewish rabbi who commands unclean spirits into their sacred animals and destroys them. And they go, whoa, we do not want this guy around. He wasn't just declaring war on their economy, but Jesus was subverting the worship of this false god. Notice how Jesus comes. He doesn't come with guns blazing, calling fire down from heaven. But there's nothing random in the Bible. Their pigs had huge significance to these people. And Jesus, how he commanded not only the unclean spirits, but into the pigs, caused the people to tremble with fear and awe, to the point where they just said, could you please leave us alone? Now go back to the story, Mark chapter 5. Notice what happens next. So Jesus does all of this. The crowd freaks out. Verse 18, as the man was getting into the boat, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who'd been demon-possessed begged to go with him. And can you blame him? I mean, if you were the dude that had the legion of demons in him for how many years? You were the dude howling every night and cutting yourself with rocks? You were the dude that people had to chain down, but you were strong enough to break the chains? Would you want to go back to your hometown? Not at all. So we can't blame the guy for saying, Jesus, can I go with you? Here's what Jesus says. Jesus did not let him, but said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he's had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Now, in Mark's account, Jesus goes back across the lake to the land of the 12, and then he only makes one other visit to the land of the 7. Flip over, if you would, to chapter 6. Verse 53. It's fascinating. Whenever Jesus makes the journey from the land of the 12 to the land of the 7, he has to do something with water. Water was a huge symbolic deal to the Jews. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Waters represented chaos in Genesis 1, out of which God brought order. Waters flooded the earth to represent judgment. They believed water was the place where evil spirits dwelt. And so Jesus, each trip, when he goes over to the land of the 7, one time there's a storm and he rebukes the storm and they go, who is this that even waves obey him? And then another time he walks on the water. I mean, these are all incredibly significant events. Jesus is almost subduing the forces of darkness as he goes into this really dark pagan land. So he's back there again, verse 53. When they had crossed over into the Decapolis, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. Now, how do they recognize him? He's only made one other trip, and that trip ended with a bunch of people begging him to leave, and Jesus looking at one dude saying, just go tell your story. You don't need a seminary degree. You didn't have the Bible memorized. Just tell what God has done. And now he comes back, and notice what happens. They ran throughout the whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever he was. And wherever Jesus went, into villages, towns, or countrysides, they placed the sick in marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. They're flocking to him right now. Flip over to chapter 8. He's still there. Verse 1. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days. I mean, I don't know what kind of view of Jesus you have. How compelling do you have to be as a person to sit for 3 days and listen to somebody? I mean, that's amazing. So he says, I have compassion on them. They have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have traveled very far. Now, I love the disciples. They're so not like us, right? These guys just were very slow to get it. So they ask a very dumb question. But where in this remote place can we get enough bread to feed everybody? He's fed 5,000 people, like prior to this, right? Hey, Jesus, I mean, where are we going to get bread? How many loaves do you have? Said Jesus again. 7, they replied. And so he does the Jesus thing with the bread. And then notice verse 8. Everyone ate and were satisfied, and afterward the disciples picked up how many basketfuls? In the land of? And how many in the land of the 12? Now you can say that's coincidence. You can say I'm totally reading into it. I don't think so. I think this is an instance where we learn a ton about Jesus, but we also learn a ton about the Bible. That there are these layers to it. Anyone can pick it up and anyone can benefit. But nothing's random in terms of how God inspired the original authors to record it for us. Now, significance. What do we pick up about Jesus from this story? First of all, I want you to notice how unbelievably boundary-breaking Jesus of Nazareth was and is. Back then, proper rabbis did not cross the lake to go from the very Jewish side to the very non-Jewish side, from the very clean side to the very unclean side, from the very religious side to the very pagan side. And here comes Jesus of Nazareth, landing in a place where there are tons of tombs. Jews were told to avoid those. Tons of pigs, you were to avoid those. A demon-possessed guy, supposed to avoid him. And he marches in there a couple of times, in spite of all the social pressure not to. See, a good religious rabbi was supposed to stay clean. And to do that, you didn't touch lepers. Jesus touched lepers. You didn't let women sit under your teaching. Jesus let women sit under his teaching. You didn't hang out with Samaritans, let alone use them as heroes in your parables, like in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Like if I were to tell you of the parable of the good terrorist, none of you would buy it. Back then, that's what a Samaritan was. I mean, this Jesus was so unbelievably groundbreaking in the way that he approached anybody. And one of the things the church has to continually be brought back to is that all the artificial lines we create to draw around ourselves to divide us, Jesus obliterates them. Jesus, you're not allowed to hang out with that group. Well, that's where you'll find him, guaranteed. So wherever the Decapolis is here, that's where you'll find him. Who are the unclean today? That's where you'll find him. And if you're going to follow him, guess where he's going to take you? There. Now, hallelujah, he's here too, right? But one of the things you see is how scandalously revolutionary he was. He goes to the land of the 12 basketfuls. I'm here for you. But he goes also to the land of the 7 left over. I'm here for you. I'm here for anybody who calls upon my name. And I just see in my heart and in the church this thing we have that was true back then too. To separate those that are in from those that are out, those that are clean from those that are unclean, those that are touchable from those who are not touchable. And back then, as today, Jesus of Nazareth pays no attention to our divisions. And he will go wherever open hearts are. If you're here and you're new to the whole Jesus conversation or the church thing, you have to know the very first thing I would want you to know about Jesus of Nazareth is that you don't have to get it all figured out. You don't have to get it all cleaned up. You don't have to get all the addictions overcome before you come to him. He's out looking for you. And he's looking for you simply because he loves you. I mean, Jesus offered this just radical message. Everyone's loved, everyone's lost, and everyone's welcome. Now, to enter into the kingdom, you got to turn away from the lostness, of course. But if you're really lost and know it, that's no big chore. It's only the people that think that there's really good stuff out there for whom it becomes a chore. But for the rest of us who've run our own lives into a ditch, the offer of Jesus sounds pretty compelling. But it was offered to anybody and everybody. Second thing I'd want you to know about Jesus. He comes undermining the false gods of the world. And he's not as antagonistic as his followers are, right? But he comes in, if you read the Christmas story, and here's this angel, saying, hey, today in the town of David, a Savior is born, a King. He is the Christ, the Lord. And you understand that in the time this was announced, the words King, Savior, and Lord were all applied to one other person, Caesar Augustus. And now they're being applied to an infant in Bethlehem. See, people say, hey, Christianity just stole a bunch of stuff from other religions. That's just not true. God comes forcing us to choose. So, of course, this guy claims to be Lord, so that title is going to be applied to Jesus, so that you have to pick. It's not like you can worship Caesar as Lord and worship Jesus as something else. No, Jesus is Lord or Caesar is Lord, and you have to choose. Dionysius is your God, or Jesus is your God, but he comes enough in conflict with Dionysius that you can't have it both ways. You can't worship the dude that just destroyed your sacred animals with unclean spirits. You got to pick. And he doesn't do this in a harsh way. He just simply comes offering an alternative to the kingdoms of the world. He can be your king, or you can be your king. You got to pick. Jesus never begged anybody. He never bribed anybody. He just simply said, listen, there are the kingdoms of this world and there's my kingdom. And there are kings in each. And you got to pick one. He comes as Savior, Lord, up against the power structures of the world. And I love, so when he's ministering in the region of Dionysius, we'll just do something with pigs. Just to show everybody, I have authority over whatever false god you think has authority in this place. Last thing I'd want you to know. This man that was healed by Jesus. Think about what Mark's telling us. Jesus goes over once. He heals the dude. The place erupts and they ask him to leave. Jesus comes back and they're flocking to him to the point where he will feed 4,000 men, 10,000 people. And the only inclination in the text we're given is the fact that this one dude was told to go and share what God has done for you. And that's it. Bless you. Bless you, young lady. There is in the church a very heretical idea that there are those who are in ministry and then there's everybody else. There are those who are missionaries and then there's everybody else. There are those who are pastors and staff and then there's everybody else. Not in the Bible. Not at all. Here's what the New Testament says about you if you're a follower of Jesus. Saint, Saint. Priest, minister, ambassador, missionary. And here's what you've got to back you up in those roles. The Spirit of God, the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, the community of God, brothers, sisters around you, the Word of God, and then your story. Could it be that God simply says, listen, for some of you, seminary would be helpful. For some of you, Greek and Hebrew would be helpful. You'd have time to do that. Fantastic. And for everybody else, I'll give you a surefire way to communicate me that people just can't argue with. Namely, tell people of the mercy that I've shown to you. End of story. I come across folks all the time who say, well, I don't have any training. I don't know how to answer questions. And I just want to say, I don't know how to answer questions either. So training isn't all that great. It's helpful. But what you as a community have to offer the city of Portland and beyond is the mercy that Jesus has shown you. And you may say, but yeah, I don't have this great testimony. We were, a couple of weeks ago, we were baptizing folks in our church, and one was coming out of the adult entertainment industry. And here's another who'd been literally a drug addict for 35 years. And here's another that had been a drug dealer. And everyone goes, yeah. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is Jesus at work. But then there are a whole bunch of other people who don't have as dramatic a story. And they're thinking, well, no one's really interested in mine. I came to Christ when I was 6. I went to Christian camp when I was 12. And I just want to beat up on that idea that you have nothing to say. First of all, your ministry is whatever you will do tomorrow morning. That's your ministry. All right? So I'm going to go to class. There's your ministry. I'm going to wake up and take care of children. There's your ministry. Got to go in the office. There's your ministry. And what do you have to offer? You have the Spirit of God, the Word of God, and the community of God, and the mercy of what God's done in your life. And notice the power of one guy's story. Leave us, Jesus. And then however much time elapses, and they see that this dude's completely changed, and then they all come flocking to him. So this morning, you've got little 3x5 cards underneath your seat. And for some of you, they're way underneath your seat. If you need someone behind you to hand them to you, that's perfectly. Some of you are getting down on your knees to get the cards on your seat. Well done. Done. All right, now here's what I'd like you to do. And you don't have to do any of this, of course. But would you put on the top of that card, God has. Just put God has. And then would you take a moment to list what God has? God has rescued. God has saved. God has provided. God has answered. God has listened. God has sustained me. God has, what would you say? Could our worship be, if you're a follower of Christ, could our worship this morning simply be reminding ourselves of the mercy He has shown us? So that we simply, with renewed passion and courage, can simply declare to the world, this is the mercy. This is what He's done. So let me pray for us, and then would you just keep filling those out as we worship together. Lord, thank you. Thank you.